Fantastic. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. Good morning.
If you're here last week, welcome back. If you weren't, give you a brief recap. I got to go to Albuquerque last month, a little over a month ago now, in October, and got to see several of my heroes in one space together, from Father Richard Rohr to Father Greg Boyle to Mirabai Starr and Brian McLaren and just a whole host of others. And it was just a treat to be with these folks. And so last week I told some of the stories of what happened when I got there and got into a lot of some of the teachings that I got to sit through, including this big opening teaching. We'll skip through all that was contrasting. And Richard Rohr founded this group called the Center for Action and Contemplation in Albuquerque, New Mexico in the late 1980s. And, very intentionally, those two words, action and contemplation, are held in tension with one another, right? When we're doing something, we're usually not contemplating. When you're sitting and contemplating and in quiet prayer, it feels like the absence of doing, right? These are two things that are seemingly opposite of one another, but obviously, if you created the center, the idea being these are two necessary paths in the Christian life. And so we heard at the beginning of this conference from a couple of these teachers, Carmen Acevedo Butcher and Brian McLaren, on the contemplative path versus the active path. I'm not going to re-go over any of that stuff, but I do want to spend a decent amount of time this morning talking about Father Richard. And I started writing out some of the things that he taught, and I do want to talk about those, but I also thought, why don't we just hear from Father Richard himself. So hopefully at least one of you remember that I did a sermon series over the summer called The Tears of Things, which is his book on the prophets, and the idea of that's a metaphor that comes, I think, from Virgil, who wrote about how that all things are worthy of tears and all things have tears. So if we look hard enough and contemplate deep enough into anything, it is both worthy of weeping over, and the thing itself has tears within them. And he uses that as this metaphor for what the prophets in the Bible are opening us up to see the great tragedies of our life that are all around us, that the prophets are continually trying to awaken the people of Israel to. And so his main session that he did was a live podcast with him and Paul Swanson and Mike, forget Mike's last name. But they talked about this missing chapter in Richard's book, that as much as he spent all this time in this wonderful little book that he gave us, he didn't spend a whole lot of time on Jesus as a prophet. And so they talk about this is actually the missing chapter of probably his last book, is that he didn't give us a full chapter on what it means for Jesus to be a prophet. And I'm just curious from you all, when you hear that metaphor, Jesus as prophet, is this something that you're comfortable with? Is this something that you feel like the church has taught you about? Is this something that's been ignored? What does Jesus as prophet elicit in you, if anything?
I'm very comfortable with it. Me too. And I feel like unifying. I feel somewhat unified when I understand that Islam and Jewish see Jesus as a prophet as well.
Yes.
So it's not a new. I guess I'm not troubled by it.
Yeah, Islam certainly honors Jesus as prophet, and that it's a significant part of their faith. And many Christians have often looked at that as taking Jesus down a peg, right? That in our theology, Jesus, yes, is prophet. Yes, but that's not what matters. It's true, but what matters is Jesus as divine, right? Jesus as the Son of God. And that this is our main selling point. And so when we hear Islam or Judaism or other folks speaking of Jesus as prophet, it is often then the Christian response to say, yeah, but that's not good enough. And so it's almost seen as an attack on Jesus' identity. And Richard identifies that this is a missing gap in Christian teaching, and Christianity has suffered as a result of it. He began, I talked a little bit about this, I was going to show a clip on this, but I'm not, because he just had too many great things to say. But he began this podcast by talking about that the rational decisions are not the things that shape us as much as erotic decisions. And by erotic, he doesn't mean sex. What he means is our deep passions. That it's the passionate parts of our life that shape us far more than logic and reason do. But if you study Christian theology, you probably wouldn't know that. But that's not been the focus of Christian theology too much. So why don't we just give Richard the floor for a few minutes and let him, I would still have access to this 2.5 hour, or maybe 2 hour, whatever it was, 90 minutes long podcast they did. But this is probably about a 10-minute clip, and it's on this question of the significance of Jesus as prophet. So take it away, Father Richard.
Let's talk about the question at hand. What changes when we think of Jesus as a prophet?
So that's the question. What changes when we think of Jesus as prophet? What I want you all to do is, as you're listening to this is going to be, Richard's near the end, and that's, I think, fair, near being a relative term. Maybe he's here another several years, we don't know, but he's not as sharp as he once was, and there's a bit of meandering response in his answer. But there is a lot packed into what he's about to share. So I'm just going to invite you, as you listen, that if something grabs you, try to hold on to it and remember it, and then we'll spend some time dissecting what, if anything, in this response resonates with you.
Let me say, first of all, that I think it's far more important to answer that question than I myself even thought. Since the Living School started, what year did it start? 2013. I always, for those of you who attended, taught a lot on the prophets. But I'm increasingly convinced that if you don't get that lineage, that genre, that way of communicating, you really don't get Jesus. He didn't walk around calling himself the Son of God. Others did. He accepted the common appellation of prophet. And let's say in its most simple form, let's call a prophet one who speaks for God. And we were so hell-bent, and I use that phrase intentionally, first 1,000 years of Christianity, of developing a doctrine of the divinity of Christ. We marshaled all the texts that could prove it. When most things Jesus did that are these awesome feeding thousands of people, prophets did that. Raising the dead was Elisha did that. These were all earmarks of a prophet, not a God. If you were a Jew, no, I'm not. I believe in the divinity of Christ. So please don't doubt that. But when all of our energy for the first, however, I don't know when to stop it, was on proving the doctrine of divinity, what we did and what we failed to do was communicate the divinity of his doctrine. Like, let's say, things like nonviolence. It's central. And how can you read the Sermon on the Mount or see how he operates and not know that? But we didn't know that. I'm told that the very phrase, at least in English and German, I don't know about Spanish, Was there a Spanish phrase for nonviolence? I don't think there was in those, because the thought wasn't there yet. So here we have Jesus as the major teacher of Western religion, and there was almost no teaching on nonviolence. It wasn't even a concept that was pursued. On simplicity. The phrase that some good Protestant theologian used was Western Christianity became a matter of sin management. And if you were a clergyman, you thought your job was to manage people's sin lives as if you could. What a waste of time. What a waste of time. I mean, if we had talked about the glorious revelation of incarnation revealed in the universal Christ and in all things, creatures great and small, and said that the whole revelation is a positive draw, a positive attraction. What a different agenda that would have been. There's I won't mention the name, there's a evangelical pastor. He's on, I don't know which channel, but he's doing advertisements for Jesus. I think it's on CNN. In the course of just maybe 3 minutes, he uses the word sin 8 to 10 times. This is what it's all about. When you start with a negative beginning point, you end with a negative answer. You define a person negatively, not creatively. And the problem gets worse. If we would have defined sin like the prophets did, issues of money and power and empire and possession. You check me out. Go read the prophets tonight. They just don't question issues of body sins, which you and I grew up with. I overtell this story. I was taught by wonderful Irish nuns who really were wonderful. But they formed the Fighting 69th Club. Have you heard of the Fighting 69th? I joined very quickly. You know what the 6th and the 9th commandments are? They're really not about sexual abuse. They're about relational abuse. The neighbor's wife, the adultery. It's relationality, not purity. But we kept our code as good warriors of the Fighting 69th and learned nothing. Nothing. I bet most of the guilt most of you have felt, Catholic and Protestant, had to do with body sins. Some kind of body issue. Even if it's overeating or over enjoying. Enjoyment was never too good a thing. How do we do this to the God of creation? So I'm so glad that we have Randy and Edith here, and we're rediscovering native spirituality. And we used to call it animism, or even worse, paganism. all this concern about animals. Look, Opie's asleep. He's bored by my talking. Either the whole universe, well, in Genesis 1, I know I've said this too much to some of you, but Genesis 1:31, and God gazed upon everything God had created, and he saw it was very good. There's our beginning point. Cosmic goodness. And what did we do? We waited till chapter 3. Calvin just loved chapter 3. He gave him the penal substitutionary atonement theory. Isn't that an ugly phrase? Penal substitutionary atonement theory. The whole mystery of transformation was defined as a transaction, an almost mercenary transaction between God and the universe. It makes you, that's the tears of things. It makes you want to cry. We're about transformation. We're not about transaction. But once you localize spirituality in body, I did it or I didn't do it, it's just, well, it's a waste of time, first of all. It doesn't get you anywhere. How could we all be so wrong? Well, they tell me the body carries shame. And I see heads nodding. My mind doesn't work very well anymore. Why do we think that shaming people will bring them to God? By what evidence do you find that to be true? The parents try it because it's the way they were raised. I was jail chaplain just a few blocks from here for 14 years, and the orderlies all were just, PhD in shaming. And these good, humble Mexican boys just submitted to it because it's the way they've been raised. Shame is a body notion. The soul is enchanted and attracted by erotic. I'm back to it. I got one idea. Nothing else changes you. Nothing else changes you. Now let me define erotic decision. I don't just mean, in fact, I do not mean sex. That's far too limited. I mean anything to do with what we call in philosophy, Boethius would have agreed with this, the good and the true and the beautiful. When you make a decision based on the good, the true, and the beautiful, planting flowers, working with orphan children, that's an erotic decision. It changes you. It transforms you. It's not a transaction. We poor Catholics, we were doing so much good mysticism that we had all kind of transactions. This many prayers, this many days in purgatory. I mean, out of purgatory. It was such a waste of time. it was such a loss of grace, such a loss of ability to read the soul and to see what was happening in the soul. And dang it, I studied the Protestant Reformation and I had an initial impression you had reformed us. Then I got to know guys like you two. They're evangelicals,
Former even.
Former evangelicals.
Okay.
And I realized you didn't touch on that at all. You were transactional, just in a different way, by this horrible penal substitutionary atonement theory. That God had to be paid off, that God could be paid off, that God was not organically in love with his creation. You start with a wrong premise, you're going to end with a wrong storyline. God.
He goes on. Well, let's at least pause there. So I'm just curious, there's a lot there. It's a bit scattered. But I'm curious if anything jumps out at you. To me, as I was listening to that again yesterday and even this morning, there really is a lovely summary of his entire work in what we just heard there. Any good teacher just sort of teaches the same things over and over again and repackages them in other forms. So I'm just curious if anything jumps out to you there, either as fascinating or I don't know what that means, what resonates with you in that long clip that we just heard.
Well, I have a couple of things. When I see the word prophet, it's a noun. It makes me think of in the educational curriculum, we have science as a subject matter, so to speak. And science is really a verb. And I see prophet as a verb when you think of Jesus' actions.
Yeah.
And it also then talking about the shaming and I think it's not shaming as much as just kind of keeping an eye on wrongdoings.
Yeah.
This season of the year, it makes me think of the elf on the shelf.
Yeah. Yes. I don't like the elf on the shelf either. Yeah, or the image of Santa. He sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. He knows if you've been bad or good. So
Jesus
to
Santa now, and then Santa has this job that has these elves helping him with.
And the things that the elf and or Santa and or God are looking at are not systemic greed. They are not issues of societal sin. It's about bad words that you spoke. It's about bodily sins, right?
And whether or not you'll get gifts.
Yes.
You'll be rewarded.
Reward, punishment. Yeah. The clip, as it goes on, because go on for a few minutes, he talks about reward, punishment can never change you. If you want to be transformed, you'll never be transformed by reward, punishment. You need a love to actually transform you. And reward, punishment is the opposite of love.
Mm-hmm. And they've certainly, AA has certainly used that way of exotic, erotic.
Yeah.
It's the feeling, it's not the continual reward that keeps you moving in any direction.
Yeah, what we're looking for in substances is not logical. It's erotic. It's libidinal. It's bodily. I like the idea of prophet as sort of not now. And so what a prophet's always doing, whoever it is revealing the heart of God. This is who God actually is. And we're all, at different times, it doesn't matter where we are, what we know, we're all mistaken about who God is, right? And need that continually revealed again and again and again. And that's what the prophet is doing. It's saying, this is what God cares about. You think God's cared about this, and you're wrong. God cares about that. And the things that, according to Richard, that the prophets are pointing us to are these larger systemic societal issues of oppression, poverty, wealth accumulation, empire, and less concerned about what you call the 69 Club, which is a very poorly named group for a variety of reasons. Jean, you had your hand up.
Well, just the whole kind good, grace, creativity, the love, it's the whole, that's where we start, and that's where we need to stay.
The goodness of God, the goodness of creation is our starting
The
point.
beauty of creation, the beauty of each and every person, the joy of each and every person.
The inherent dignity.
And just that's what's transformating. I have always struggled with the whole concept of, worship is to transform us.
Mhm.
So after we've experienced worship, we should go out transformed.
Yeah.
But I get about halfway in the parking lot and I'm not transformed anymore.
Yeah.
I'm back on, oh, I'm
You
gonna do
forget.
this, I'm gonna do that. It's right, it's wrong, it's green, it's blue. But this again, we saying it again. It's about what's good and creation and about love and none of the above. It's not about the checklist of sins or the checklist of doing even.
Yeah.
It's not the doing.
It's about being.
No.
And being transforms us.
Yeah.
What else do I have here? I love this idea. By focusing on the doctrine of Jesus' divinity, the church has ignored the divinity of his doctrine. I think that's right. And it is, as we take a step back, it is shocking, isn't it, that it took 2,000 years for any part of the church in any type of systematic way to start thinking, you know what, this whole nonviolence thing might actually be pretty important to what Jesus is doing. And we pretty much just ignored it. Now, it is true, the very early church, before Constantine's conversion, I think there's a way we can tell that story that's overly simplistic, but it is true that before Constantine's conversion, before everybody becomes a Christian in the Roman Empire against their will, much of the church taught and believed that you could not be a soldier in the Roman Empire and be a Christian. And for most of us in this country, it's something we we just take it for granted. We glorify joining the military. Like, I'm not all right, grateful for freedoms, all those things. But the fact that it doesn't even occur to most of us to even consider that joining the military might have some type of conflict with our faith in Christ, who says turn the other cheek, shows how disconnected we are from the divinity of his doctrine. Right? By focusing on his divinity as God, it then excuses us from having to actually think about, contemplate, much less obey the things that he's taught us. Mona.
Well, but didn't Judaism, I thought they kind of fleshed out this idea of the divinity of the doctrine.
Say
And
more
so
about
then-
that.
Well, and Christianity then, just sort of, I think, kind of assumed, well, so we know that what Jesus taught, that was divine because Jesus taught. And what we're proclaiming here is that he was divine.
Yeah, and that's what
We all
matters.
know. We all. That's a thing that's surprising me right now, because the Old Testament was around, and Jesus, that was his. That
That's
was
his
really,
scripture.
yeah, that was what he used. So.
And you think of the Sermon on the Mount, which you referred to. Much of the Sermon on the Mount has been taught in Protestant Christianity as what Jesus is doing is eliciting in us our knowledge of our own sin to such a degree that we fall on our knees and say, God, you must save me. Which in and of itself isn't, I think, a terrible observation. It's not the worst observation. But what it does then, if we read the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus is telling us to turn the other cheek, where he's telling us to, sell our possessions and give to the poor, all these very radical teachings, which are an intensification of the Old Testament. It's not, you've heard it said, but I say unto you, which is the phrase, and then you've heard it said this, but I'm letting you off the hook. In fact, every single time in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is simply amplifying what the Old Testament says. And what Protestant Christianity has said is, and at the result of that, we realize that none of us can actually obey this, which I think is I think that's an accurate observation by Protestant Christianity. True, none of us can. So we are utterly dependent on grace. True. But that does not mean that his only intent with this teaching is then to simply get us to say, I'm sorry, forgive me.
Right.
It's also to live into the knowledge of our forgiveness, to recognize that it is only through grace that we can do these things, but then that grace actually can enable us to do these things. That the Holy Spirit has power in our lives to actually transform us such that we can learn to lay down our lives for our friends. So we just, by focusing so deeply on Jesus as the Son of God, it's allowed us to just get off the hook and say, well, he forgave my sin, and everything turns into that transaction. Are we familiar with this phrase, penal substitutionary atonement? Do we know this phrase?
I'd like to see a good definition.
No.
Okay, so this is Protestant Christianity's great gift to the world. You're welcome, world. It existed in its own forms in Catholicism, but Luther and Calvin, particularly Calvin, who's our forefather as Presbyterians, took it and put it on steroids. So when it comes to what is happening in the cross in the New Testament, the New Testament gives us all kinds of different answers. There's no one thing. This is what the cross does. I think across the board, the New Testament said the cross is a really big deal. Like, it's really, really important. But what is taking place there is open for discussion. And the New Testament gives us a bunch of different metaphors about what's taking place there. And so what theologians have come up with is what we call atonement theories. Right? Theories. Not definitive answers, but here's a way to think about what's taking place in the cross. The earliest one is often referred to as Christus Victor. And so that Christ is victorious over sin, death, and the power of the devil. And the cross is the revelation of this utterly counterintuitive victory that nobody could see coming. That what looks like failure is actually defeat. And what it's doing is setting us free from these powers that we are otherwise captive to. The earliest form, and that's rooted in Paul's writings. And then there's other forms. Well, I'll skip the others. We don't have time for that. We get to Calvin, and Calvin is the real thing that's taking place in the cross is that because God is perfect, because God is utterly holy, God cannot be in the presence of sin. And so we look at ourselves, and obviously we're sinful. So how can we be brought into the presence of God? Well, God's holiness demands that God must punish sin. That God would not remain holy if God did not punish sin. And so, in order to be in relationship with us, to be in community with us as humanity, God needed to solve this problem of how can I be in relationship to humanity and also punish sin. And here comes Jesus to say, I'll do it for you. And so Jesus becomes God's means by which humanity is punished for its sin and then consequently forgiven for its sin. Which, again, like everything, depending on how we frame this, you can make that not terrible news. You can make that good news. But the way that many of us have imbibed this teaching, and it's very present in a lot of our hymns, it's deeply present in contemporary Christian music, like obsessively present in a lot of the popular music on radio stations like The River. It's like this. If any of you have, now I say this is an exaggeration, but it also is an emotional truth. Imagine God as the drunk father. Imagine God as the drunk, angry father. And dad comes home, and dad's ready to wail on someone because he's a mean, angry drunk. And you are the younger sibling in this family. And dad is coming to wail on you in his drunken rage. And your older brother Jesus steps in the way and says, no, Dad, hit me instead. And dad does. And so then you don't get hit, you don't go to hell. You are grateful for your older brother for standing in the way of God's wrath. And now we can live as a happy family. But anybody who's had any connection to abusive relationships knows this creates a profoundly toxic way to relate to God. And I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that bit of a caricature view of the cross is how most Protestant Christians have understood what's taking place in the cross. Jesus taking our rightful punishments onto himself, what should be our punishment, so that we can be set free. But you end up with a profoundly insecure relationship with God. Because behind, yes, it's great, I guess, that you didn't get punished. That part's nice. But you still end up in relationship with a God who, if God had God's way, God would have beat the hell out of you. And that's what God really wants to do. But Jesus provides the way out. So Jesus becomes the good cop, God is the bad cop, and the cross is supposed to be good news. But it's not, right? It's really, really toxic news. And so this is what he's getting at by talking about the toxic nature of penal substitution. Penal punishment, substitution, Jesus gets in our way. He is our substitute and atonement to make us right with God. And this is Protestant Christianity's great gift to the world, among others. But this is our gift that needs to be, at minimum, redefined. And many, many people have been saying, I don't want anything to do with it. And I'm fine with that, right? Whatever works for you in your relationship with God, no problems, no notes. You do you. I think there are ways to redeem even that metaphor, but it needs to be profoundly nuanced. We need to get away from the toxic view of a God who wants to punish us. But that's what he's getting at, of like any parent who looks at their child and knows this is not how good parenting works, and yet we projected it up onto God. Prophets make sin about money, power, and oppression, while the church is focused on personal bodily sins. Yep. Shame cannot transform you to health, only erotic decisions based on the good, the true, and the beautiful. All right, this is where I cut off we didn't watch the end of this. He then makes reference to Teilhard de Chardin. Anybody read Teilhard? You have? I have not yet, and maybe I'll put that on my list on sabbatical. This Jesuit priest who was also an anthropologist and had these really radical teachings about the physical nature of the universe, the theological shape of the universe, and was kind of relegated by the Catholic Church. Don't teach that. He was very deeply accepting of the theory of evolution, had no problems with this at all, and started teaching and writing on that, and his writings were banned by the Catholic Church. So he dies, I want to say, in the 1950s in New York City in obscurity, and there was a woman who had access to his writings and posthumously published all of them, and the world, for those who've been paying attention, has never been the same. So one of the things Teilhard talks about, which is a really radical saying, the physical shape of the universe is love. And what he means by that is that the force of gravity is not something that you choose to obey or not. Gravity is working on you whether you know it or not. And that's what love is. Love is the attraction of objects one to another. So what we see manifest in our physical universe through the power of gravity is the physical shape of God's love in the world. That all of us are ultimately attracted to be in connection and relationship one to another and are drawn to one another. Pretty radical stuff that I don't really understand yet.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, and fine. Reward punishment never gets you to love. I get so excited about this last part because it means that for us, like in this moment, in 2025, almost 2026, we get the chance to make, certainly for one of, if not the first time in church history, to figure out, is being church worthwhile if we are not afraid of God? What if you're not afraid of God anymore? What if God is not the angry drunk and has never been the angry drunk and has only ever wanted to be in relationship with you and everybody else and is this source of divine love that permeates all things? And this is all God has ever been, and there's no threat to you or to anybody else of some eternal hell that keeps you in line as the great threat of punishment. What if you could just fully remove that fear from your spirituality forever? Would it be worthwhile to be a Christian? And to me, the answer is absolutely. In fact, it's the only worthwhile reason to be a Christian, right? Is when we're not afraid of God anymore. And I don't know that that has been part of church history until this moment, that we really have a chance right now to start learning what it means to be community without fear of punishment. Tori?
Yeah, just to that point, I'll say, I think it's kind of part of this, the tiny human brain as compared to God, that we make everything God wants to put out there smaller and harder. Because it is a little overwhelming and a little scary to think about something that enormous.
Yeah.
So we try to make it small so we can conceive of it. And to that last bullet point, in all my many years in education, I have found that parents who are very rigid in their ideas of reward and punishment created young people who were gifted liars because they were always seeking to avoid that punishment, and it made it ugly instead of beautiful. That personality of that child, and they would rat out anybody. They would put their small little indiscretions on anybody. It just made all the relationships so much more difficult.
Yeah.
And it was kind of heartbreaking to see that happening to children.
Yeah, reward punishment, that's fascinating, that it encourages lying. The other thing, even if you aren't falling into the lie and you are kind of this model of Christian virtue, there's still this question behind it, like, but why? If you're going, my anniversary is a week from today. If I took Sarah out and we're at our anniversary together, and I just tell her, Sarah, I'm just so glad to be with you here on our 23rd year together, because as your husband of 23 years now, I know that it is my duty to be here with you on this day. That I have to be here to be a good husband. That this is what I have to do, and we're having this meal together out of obligation. And I'm so grateful to be able to fulfill my obligation as a husband to both be with you and to share this time with you. And I just want to thank you for allowing me to fulfill my obligation. You might be doing all the right things, right? But you're doing it for the wrong reason, which is obedience as opposed to love. And these are very, very different motivations. So even if you're the kid who checks all the boxes, if you're still doing it out of fear of punishment, it's like, what is that worth?
What's the point of a life like
what's
that?
the point?
You know?
The point for them is to avoid punishment.
Yeah. And then, like, a really sad thing too that happens when you, as a child, develop the habit of lying to people in order to avoid punishment. It gets really hard to be honest with yourself.
Yes.
And then your whole view of reality can be pretty distorted, and it can be really hard to understand the whys and wherefores. I'm super curious about Richard Rohr's definition of the erotic and how that makes God's love small. Our puny human brains try to make it about sex.
Yeah.
And then we try to make sex bad, and then we lean away and we mess up all of our bodily relationships, which in the much grander sense messes up all of our relationships with neighbors, community, so on and so forth. And in the present day and worldview, there's some massive connections there.
For sure.
I this doesn't seem tangential, but it's been going through my mind this whole time in this world, in this culture. Isn't terms of endearment a form of grace, a form of the way we live out, as cultures, as people have developed, the way we live out our beliefs. I don't know, because it seems like now, and I don't want to get political, but I'm just saying, to call terms of endearment in the way that we treat one another, even in wars, as stupid, is somehow that is such a violation of what we were talking about as love, truth, and beautiful of all people, regardless of the awful situations we get ourselves into.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm just throwing it out there.
And what damage it does to our souls when we...
Well, look at the trauma.
Yeah.
Look at the trauma.
Bob?
Well, maybe I'm simplistic, but he talked about transformation. The two examples he gave transformation. Somebody remember?
No.
Taking care of orphans and planting flowers.
Oh,
So simple.
That's where
He did.
that's
Good, true.
the kind of thing
Changes.
that leads to transformation.
And love for its own sake is what changes us. Not, I'm planting flowers because God tells me the world should be beautiful, so I'm going to go make the world beautiful. Again, like that's reward punishment. That doesn't change anything. But if you're planting flowers to make the world beautiful because you want it to be a beautiful place, because you love the world and love the God who placed you in it, that can actually change you. So we didn't have time to get to Greg Boyle, but that's okay, because Richard has been the one who has been so influential on my life, and I'm glad to be able to share a bit of him with you. You're in treat this morning. This music is going to be incredible. I was listening to some of it already this morning. We've got a really beautiful service ahead of us that hopefully will speak to the erotic parts of our soul, the true, the good, and the beautiful. So I'm going to close in prayer and go get ready. Lord, thank you for sending your prophets to this world, that we have not been left alone to figure out who you are, but all along the way, in different parts of the world, at different times, you've sent people who can see you with a greater clarity than we can. The goodness of who you are and who you've created us to be. For Father Richard and many other teachers in our lives, we think even just to the ones along the way in our lives, the simple teachers, whether from Sunday school or our educational experience, who revealed something about who you are to us. For all of them, we give you thanks. And of course, for the prophet Jesus, who is always revealing to us that your heart beats on our side, and that you are more gracious than we've been told, more gracious than we even can imagine. So continue to soften, mold our hearts to beat with yours, to live a life of love, not out of fear of punishment, but out of love for you and out of love for each other. And Lord, inspire us to, in this moment of time that we inhabit, to be a church that gets to do this, not has to. That is privileged to share life together. Not out of obligation, but simply out of love. May it be. Amen.